Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm really excited to talk about some silly little books here that I bought over the past couple months, and it's just going to be a really chill reading update slash fantasy book haul. Thank you so much for clicking here. Thank you so much for being here on my channel. I appreciate your presence. And yeah, before I get into the book haul, I wanted to do a really quick sort of reading update. And so in my last book haul that I posted, I said that I bought Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, and this is the book that I was reading this month for the majority of the time after I finished Words of Radiance and Warbreaker. About 75% done with it. So far, this has been really unexpectedly enjoyable, and there's a certain quality to this book that even though I might not have all the facts in a certain scene, there's the sense that you'll find out. And that forward momentum, I think, really keeps this book moving and the plot moving forward. And all the characters in this are incredibly engaging. I think a couple months ago, Stephen Erickson put out that Facebook post where he talks about like people don't like my characterization, and it was kind of a defense of his work. Even though at that point I hadn't read any Malazan books or any of his books really. I don't know if he's written other books other than Malazan, but I was not familiar with his work at that time. But I did find that post really interesting, and part of the reason I even wanted to read Malazan was because of that Facebook post. I found it really interesting that an author would talk about their writing process in such an unorthodox way, I guess. 75% into this book, I can safely say that yeah, the characters in this are very well written, very well drawn, and they make sense for the situations that they're in. And surprisingly, there's a lot of comedic elements to this series that I wasn't expecting. I had thought that Malazan would be this very grimdark, sort of very not super happy series, and there is a lot of that. The tone is often very grim, and war is a huge thing in this book, and it definitely doesn't romanticize war in any way. But at the same time, there's elements of the found fantasy trope that I really have been enjoying in this book. So I definitely will be doing a full book review of this, but yeah, I just wanted to sort of tie this haul into my previous haul and let you guys know that yeah, I do read the books that I buy. So a common theme in this haul you might notice is that a lot of these books I actually bought after the Times 100 list came out, the best 100 fantasy list came out. I personally found the conversation surrounding the list really fascinating, and I learned a lot about fantasy. And honestly, one of the things I learned was that I haven't read half as much as fantasy as I thought I had. And so I went out and bought a lot of books based on the recommendations of people who were talking about authors who were left out, but also some authors that were on the list itself that I had never heard of. So one of them was Amber, The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny, and this is a very thick boy. It's an omnibus edition. I got it for $10 off of Thrift Book, so it's a little beat up, but that's fine. So about a year ago, I kept getting recommended the subreddit for Amber, and at first I was like, what is this? Like, why am I getting recommended? And then one day I just like clicked on it, and I was like just lurking, and I realized that this book has a very loyal cult following. And I think that whenever a fantasy series has a cult following that's very dedicated and loyal, that's always a good sign to me, because I think it means it's one of those like underrated gems that just flew under the radar and doesn't get enough credit. So I'm super excited to get into Amber. I'm glad that I got the omnibus edition so I can just burn through it in one go. And the funny thing is, like, the size of that one omnibus is like the size of one Stormlight book. So it's pretty doable, I think, to do in like about a week or two to just burn through all the books. So yeah, I'm really keen to get into the Chronicles of Amber. So earlier this year, I read Middle Game by Shannon Maguire, and in my review of it, I think I actually didn't give the book enough credit for all the things that it did really well, and I kind of harp on this one thing, which was the ending. So I decided to buy Rosemary and Rue by Shannon Maguire because for one thing, I loved her writing style in Middle Game. I heard that Rosemary and Rue is a urban fantasy that centers around fairies. So I was like, combining Shannon Maguire's writing with fairies just sounded so fantastic to me. So I cannot wait to get into that series, and I have been searching for urban fantasy for a long time. I tried the Dresden Files and I didn't love the main character, Harry Dresden. I just didn't like him, and honestly, I don't want to have to like turn off my misogyny radar whenever I read a book, you know? Like I want to just be able to enjoy a book for what it is without having to ignore large portions of a character's behavior. So I've decided that I'm not going to try and read the Dresden Files, even though I realize that it's very popular and very well loved. So in lieu of putting myself through reading the Dresden Files, I'm just going to read the October Day series and see where that takes me. And if you're someone who loves the Dresden Files, all power to you. I myself enjoy a lot of problematic things, so I completely understand. Personally, it's just not something that I think I would enjoy, and for the longest time I was like kind of dreading having to read it, and then I was like, you know what, I don't have to read it. Like if I don't want to read it, there's a lot of other urban fantasy out there that I will probably like. So I have another omnibus edition, which is the Gormenghast novels by Mervyn Peake, and I really fucked up when I bought this because I didn't know that this was an unfinished series. So I guess I've just signed myself up for more disappointment by buying this, but I mean, by the size of it, I mean, there's a good amount for me to read and enjoy, even though it's not finished and will never be finished, since I think Mervyn Peake has unfortunately passed away. But I heard it was gothic fantasy, and again, it came up a lot in the subsequent discussion around the Times list, and a lot of people were, I think it wasn't included, and a lot of people were mad about it. I can't remember if it was either on there or not. But yeah, gothic horror is kind of a new genre for me, and I think it's a genre I would really enjoy if I got into it more. So gothic horror combined with fantasy, I think, is one of the best ways to sort of dip my toes into it. So yeah, I have heard nothing but good things about this series, except for the fact that it's unfinished. So yeah, another book that I'm really keen to read. All right, these next two books I bought at a local Japanese bookstore, and I went in wanting to buy more manga, but I actually just bought two translated works of fiction. So the first one is Voices of a Distant Star, and this was written by the director of the movie Your Name, which is an anime film that I watched. I think I was in high school when I watched it, and it was just the most beautifully emotional romance. Like so gorgeous, and the animation was beautiful. And this seems like it's another sort of sci-fi romance, and I think in Western literature, like sci-fi romance isn't very common, and usually if sci-fi has romance, it's not very well written. So I'm really excited to get into this because I think that sci-fi and romance are two genres that I haven't seen a lot of cross between. So I'm really interested to read this, and it's a short little book, and so shouldn't be too hard to get through. The other book I got was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. And I love reading books that are centered around just one character. It's always a nice break from fantasy books that I tend to read to just go for a more literary examination of one person's life. I love the concept of this woman who works at a convenience store, and she is perfectly fine with working at a convenience store, but you know, other people are like, oh, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to get married? And all these questions that you have to grapple with. I think it'll be a really interesting read. And just in general, all of the Japanese literature I've ever read, I find it really interesting because I usually read a lot of Western literature, so it's always nice to sort of branch out and read translated works. For me, reading is always about gaining new perspectives as much as it is about escapism or just pure entertainment. Up next, I have The Night by Gene Wolfe. And so Gene Wolfe actually was on the Times list. I think he was on there for Book of the Sun or something like that, the solar cycle. And I think I went on Thrift Books and I couldn't find it, so I just ended up going with The Night. I don't know, I really don't know anything about the series except for the fact that Neil Gaiman has endorsed it. So even if I don't end up enjoying the book as a whole, it might be interesting to trace its influence on Gaiman's work. Gene Wolfe is one of those authors that I've heard a lot about. He's not very mainstream. I think that only really hardcore fantasy fans know about him, but he's like all my favorite authors' favorite author, like Ursula K. Le Guin, Neil Gaiman. They've all said wonderful things about him. I also got Swords Point by Ellen Kushner, and the main reason I got this was because I think that women have been writing fantasy for a really long time, and that their contributions to the genre have just been overlooked for various reasons. But I was really interested to see that there were women writing fantasy before the 90s and who weren't Robin Hobb, and this book came out in 1987, so I want to know more about, you know, this sort of fantasy that women were writing, and this seems really interesting. It's described on the back as a melodrama of manners, which sounds pretty awesome. I'm honestly imagining this as like Pride and Prejudice, but with swords. I love Pride and Prejudice and I love swords, so sign me up. The next book I bought purely because I love the cover, and it's The Traitor Baru Cormorant, and this cover reminds me of the film Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland. It's just so beautiful and haunting, and I went on NPR, did a book review for it, and the book review was just completely glowing, and I think I'll read a little part from the book review actually. This is not a happy book, it's not an uplifting book, but it is a crucial, necessary book. A book that looks unflinchingly into the self-replicating virus of empire, asks the hardest questions, and dares to answer them. So that sounds pretty awesome if you ask me, and my friend Chase already started reading it, and he said it's accountant fanfic. I don't know how that's gonna factor in, but it only makes me more excited to read it. And finally, I have the Assassin's Apprentice Illustrated Edition by Robin Hobb, which is just the most gorgeous book I've ever owned. Like, genuinely, I love this book. It did come a little scuffed because I ordered it through Amazon, which really serves me right for supporting Amazon. But God, these illustrations are just gorgeous. I've mentioned before on the channel, but Robin Hobb is definitely in my top 5 favorite fantasy authors of all time. And so I was more than happy to buy this book and support her, even though I already own like all her books on ebook. I do think it's totally worth it to buy this book. The illustrations are absolutely gorgeous in person, and just being able to like hold them and look at them in detail, you notice so much more. And I think the artist just did such a fantastic job of capturing these characters' likenesses. And oh my God, I just flipped to a very emotional scene in the book. But yeah, if you haven't read Robin Hobb, seriously, put her on the top of your TBR. She is just one of the best character writers in the entire fantasy genre, and I can't wait to get the other illustrated editions. They are a little more pricey. If you couldn't tell from the rest of this haul, I tend to buy my books used. So whenever I do buy like an actual full price hardcover, it's kind of an event for me and I have to save up for it a little bit. But I can't wait to buy the other 2 books in the trilogy, the illustrated editions, because it was totally worth it for this first one. And yeah, that's it for this book haul. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Thank you so much for 600 subscribers. I cannot believe that 600 people have subscribed to me. Like, even if half of you are bots, that means that 300 actual humans subscribe to me. So thank you so much to all of you human beings who subscribe to me, and I hope you enjoy this video.